Welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, a recruiting and search business focused on the robotics and AI industries. The Machine Minds show is where we dive deep into the intricate world of robotics and artificial intelligence. As a staffing industry leader with a passion for the frontiers of technology, I'm pleased to be bringing you intimate conversations with the founders, investors, and trailblazers who are at the heart of the AI and robotics revolution. In each episode, we dig into their journeys, the applications of the products they're working on, and the breakthroughs that are shaping our future. Join us as we explore how these machine minds are transforming the way we live, work, and understand our world. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a tech enthusiast, or just curious about this amazing field, you'll learn something new with each episode. Let's delve into the extraordinary. Let's delve into Machine Minds. Hello and welcome to Machine Minds, where technology and humanity meet. I'm your host, Greg Terrusian, founder of Samson Rose, a robotics and AI-focused search firm. And on today's episode, we are joined by Sam Abidi, the Chief Commercial Officer of Monarch Tractor. Monarch Tractor builds autonomous technology for the agriculture industry and has a farmer-first approach, which I'm really excited to dive into. Thanks for being here, Sam.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Big fan of the podcast.
Oh, love that. My pleasure. All right, let's jump into it. So usually I pass it over to the guest so our listeners can find out a bit more about you. So can you please tell us a bit about your background and your journey that led you into this role with Monarch?
Yeah, happy to. My journey started a long time ago in robotics. Probably almost 20 years ago. I started working in a robotics research lab. There was a bunch of really smart PhDs who were running around building robots, mostly for the Department of Defense at that time. And I was kind of the helping hand. I built small robots. I messed around with sensors. I got software running. And this really got me fascinated by the world of robotics and computer vision and data analytics. So much so that I, pretty much committed to this career path from there forward. And I've really spent the last 15 years helping commercialize autonomous robots, data and analytics, computer vision solutions in a whole bunch of different industrial verticals. So my career started off as a management consultant at Deloitte. I spent about 6 years there advising the Department of Defense on how to integrate this technology. I then spent a good chunk of time helping the logistics industry start to figure out what autonomous trucking meant for it. This is right about the time in the 2020 when autonomous trucking was starting to take off and get a lot more attention. You were starting to have executives at large retailers or large trucking companies start to ask, what does this mean for my business? And so I spent a lot of time working with both the Fortune 500 companies, but then also all of the different autonomous trucking players. And I really got so enamored by the opportunity here. It kind of hit me in the face when you looked at the business case that I actually jumped ship, decided I needed to get my hands dirty and actually play in the startup space. And I joined Embark Trucks. So Embark Trucks was one of the leading autonomous trucking players at the time. And when I joined them, they were about 70 people. And for the next 3 years, really rode that rocket ship. So I helped grow that business from about 70 to 350 people, structured all of our partnerships with the different large logistics players, figured out what the business model was going to be, how are fleets actually going to take ownership of and run these trucks, really got deep into their business, how they operate, and how you can integrate this tech without totally disrupting the way that they do business. So that was an incredible journey. We took the company public and then actually helped sell it private again. And then after that transaction, I essentially took the lessons I'd learned, which was largely on-road autonomy is very difficult. And if you look at off-road, I'd always knew it was easier, right? Yeah. Like it's quite intuitive. But I maybe guessed, 2-3 times easier. It turns out it's more like 10 times easier. Wow. And so this really drove me to start. Yeah, that's my take on the situation, especially when you look at some of these very structured use cases inside of agriculture. And so I started digging into all the different off-road autonomy applications. Ag started sticking out as a really meaningful opportunity to make impact today versus years down the road. And so I started looking at it, a bunch of the different players. And at the same time, happenstance had it that Monarch actually had reached out to me and said, "Hey, saw what you were doing at Embark. Would love to love to see if you want to continue the autonomy journey, kind of pick up the torch where you left it off." Started talking with the team, a great group of folks, and joined up with Monarch recently, and have really enjoyed it so far. It's a lot of the hypotheses I had about how autonomy could be done with less engineering effort in agriculture versus some of the on-road stuff has come to fruition through the work I've been doing with the team. So have really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. And I guess it's not only the engineering effort, because I had similar experiences and revelations, shall I say, that the off-road, private land, lower speed, all of that, in terms of regulations and the red tape that you have to deal with, is a lot easier to navigate, right? And the route to market, route to commercial usage is a lot quicker.
Completely agree. I kind of have my thought out perspective on all this, but it all stems from the same thing. And you said it, private land. The fact that it's land that's typically owned by a business and they control what happens there, that fact trickles down to so many benefits. One, regulators tend to allow them to largely self-regulate or regulate within some pretty tightly defined rules.
Right.
And then two, because they're landowners, they're typically looking for some sort of return on their investment on the land or the warehouse that exists there, if it's another off-road vertical, or the construction project that's happening there, or the mining operation that's happening there. Whatever you're doing on that land, it's typically a business who owns it and they're looking for an ROI. And that allows you to make kind of a dollars and cents case about the autonomy versus a subjective one, or one of, am I as a consumer willing to hop in this robotaxi? And dollar and cents cases tend to converge quicker. And so that benefit is accrued to you as well. There's a lot of factors that stem from that private land.
Yeah. And then also, if you're not on open road, you don't have to worry about if there is an accident or a road pedestrian or something malfunctions, or even just the general public's perception of a car driving with no one in there. You completely have to, you don't even have to think about that.
100%. I mean, in on-road, you have the unions, the Teamsters, if you will, for autonomous trucking, who are this large population that has a concern about how those trucks are run. You have the public that has, rightfully so, meaningful concerns that the vehicles are up to a certain safety standard. In the off-road environment, you still come across these bodies. There's OSHA and other parties like that. But you get to sit down with them and walk them methodically through how you're resolving the safety issue. Versus having to kind of make a quick pitch in a 30-second clip, for example, which this stuff is too complicated to make a 30-second pitch at the time.
Yeah, I bet. Well, I'd love to dive more into Monarch Tractor and how they're really revolutionizing agriculture and everything there. So I know you joined recently, but can you give us a bit more insight into the journey and what inspired the creation of the company?
Yeah, absolutely. If I went back to the company's founding, which was back in 2018, the thesis was this. There are a couple of different technology themes that are taking hold in auto. This is back in 2018. There's electrification. Tesla's taking off at the time. There's automation. You're watching the Waymo and Cruise program start to really build up. And there's digital. You're watching the connectivity movement started by OnStar and the likes really start to bear fruit. But none of this had made its way into agriculture in any meaningful way. And the thesis at Monarch was, if you wanted to transition these technologies out of auto into ag, you needed a company that's focused on that and that was going to build a tractor from the ground up to embody those three things. Because there had been attempts to kind of tack one or the other onto an existing tractor. But as we saw with Tesla back in the mid-2010s, you have to build a vehicle for that purpose. This is where the skateboard concept comes from, right? Like you can't just take a normal chassis design and electrify it. You have to redesign the chassis around the battery to realize the benefits. The same reality exists in agriculture, but across multiple dimensions. Both you have to redesign for the battery. You also need to adjust the architecture to enable full autonomy. And then also, if you're going to be doing digital, there are certain things you would put in the vehicle that you otherwise wouldn't. And so with all of that kind of swirling around, Monarch set off in circa 2018 to build a tractor from the ground up to realize this. And we did it just like anyone else who builds a hardware software product would do it. We had our iterations. So we created an alpha build of the tractor. It obviously had lots of issues. We revised that and got rid of a bunch of them. At this point, we had something that was good enough to actually hand over to customers to start getting feedback. And then we used that feedback to really hone the product for a particular customer segment. And in our case, it was vineyards. Vineyards tend to be some of the earlier adopters of technology. The environment's relatively controlled. And so we started honing the product for the vineyard market, went through a few more iterations. And then in the end of 22, beginning of 23, we essentially began selling for the first time. And 2023 was really, this last year, was our first big year. So we sold hundreds of these tractors to farmers around the West Coast. And they're now running on the farms alongside other tractor brands that have been there for decades or 100 years plus. And so that's really, obviously there was a ton of trial and tribulation in the middle, but that's been kind of our journey to date.
That's so cool. Very cool. Yeah. And that you're actually, commercially available and out there in the farms right now, in the vineyards, and against or side by side with, the known brands there. So having people, real customers already adopting it and using it on a day-to-day basis, I can only imagine will just like catapult your development and then also future iterations and future products and all the feedback that you're getting from that sort of scale of usage.
Completely agree. Yeah.
So let's talk a bit about the technology and how Monarch have approached autonomy. Can you tell us a bit more about the system?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing to point out here is if you look at a bunch of on-road autonomy systems or even off-road autonomy systems, really up until a handful of years ago, they kind of throw the whole kitchen sink at it. They use LiDAR, they use radar, they use camera, they use GPS, IMUs, wheel odometry, any sensor you can imagine, they put it on the vehicle. And some of these sensors, it's fine because they're not super expensive and the value that they bring is well worth the cost. But some of the sensors like LiDAR have a pretty high price point, which makes it a little prohibitive to commercialize. And the team at Monarch had seen this play out before. And so from day one, they took a camera-based approach to autonomy. This is not totally dissimilar from what you'll see at Tesla, but the idea was camera technology, and specifically the software, the machine learning, the neural networks that process images from cameras, has seen such a step function improvement in the late 2010s that it actually makes sense to build your architecture from the ground up around this sensor modality. And that was essentially the thesis that Monarch had. And so we are, one of the only players in space that's taking a camera-only approach to level 4 autonomy in the agriculture space. And we've had to overcome a bunch of problems on the software side to account for that. Cameras will get glare. We've all kind of seen news stories about this. And so how do you resolve that? They'll get occluded with dirt. How do you notify the driver when this happens? And so we've kind of made this trade-off decision. We've said we can reduce the cost dramatically, which is going to help us scale in the long run. And for that, we're going to have to do some additional development to really get cameras to work at commercial scale. And we've been at that for a handful of years, and we've been seeing good results now as we're rolling out the first set of tractors onto the farm with that configuration. So I think camera first is kind of the unique thing that Monarch took a big bet on and is seeing some positive results from now.
That's great. And I realized, obviously I'm familiar with Monarch Tractor. I've seen your presentations before and stuff like that. But for our listeners who have never heard of you guys, and obviously after this will go and do their own research, but can you just talk about, people might be listening to this and be thinking, well, why do I need an autonomous tractor? Like I can just drive myself or something like that. But it's very unique. I don't want to, steal your light here, but can you talk about how your product actually works and, the functionality and variety of use cases?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, how tractors get used on the farm is not something that's immediately evident to folks who haven't been on a farm. So it's a very good point. So, um, unlike a car, which essentially is just meant to drive from point A to point B, a tractor's sole purpose is actually to haul implements around the field. And a lot of folks probably haven't heard of implements, but if you imagine in your mind a picture of a tractor running up and down a field, it might have like a plow on the back. A plow is one of many implements. And over the course of the season, farmers essentially haul different implements up and down the field, doing different tasks. And that's really how we grow food. So they start the season by hauling some sort of tilling machine that turns over the dirt. Then they'll come through the row with some sort of seeding machine that'll lay the seeds. Then they'll come through the row with some sort of mower that'll lower grass if there's grass in between the vine rows. Then they'll come through with some sort of sprayer that'll spray different chemicals that are needed to ensure safe growing of the food. And then they'll come through with some sort of harvesting implement. And every single one of these tasks, the tractor is pulling an implement that does the task. And so the whole season, really what the tractor does is it goes up and down the rows maybe 10 different times, each time hauling a different one of these implements. And so when you automate the tractor, you're effectively automating all the operations that happen on the farm over the course of the season. And now another, kind of hurdle we have to get over. We always imagine a farm as being, John the farmer. He has his land and he's manning it year in and year out. But there's a meaningful segment of farming that is commercial operations. These folks have hundreds of tractors that are managing thousands of acres of farmland. And so you have this huge fleet of tractors that has a huge labor cost associated with it. And that's a labor cost that actually they can't even fill many times of the years because the number of folks who are skilled enough to actually drive tractors, which are rather complex, is pretty limited.
Yeah.
So you can now start to see how being able to have a tractor drive itself up and down the farm begins to have this meaningful impact on a large commercial farm operation because now they're able to essentially purchase dozens or hundreds of these and run them without drivers 24/7 if needed to complete all the operations over the course of the season. So that's how automating a tractor turns into a real meaningful impact on the food you and I eat every day.
Yeah. You can really see the autonomy in agriculture and why it's so needed and useful. Because a thing that people always, I guess the general public, they're always worried about, it's like, robots or anything like that is going to take over our jobs or, displace people in their career or whatever. But to your point, you can't, well, there's two things there. One, you can't fill a lot of these jobs, most of the time. And two, the cost now associated with things like healthy food, that's integral to society, is just going to keep rising and rising and rising with, the cost of living, because that will just tie straight back to the bottom line there. So implementing things like this is giving the farmers the ability to actually produce what they need to produce, but also reducing the cost for everyone. And then, not stopping any bottlenecks along the way, which is huge.
Yeah, no, to make that point finer, we have farmers today that we sell to who, last season or the season before that, they left food out in the field because they couldn't get the resources, the human resources, to actually go help pull it all. Or they didn't seed a particular block because they just didn't have the time before the season ended. That happens today still with as lubricated of a labor market as we have in the US. That's still where farming's at. So it is a one-for-one benefit when you're able to introduce an autonomous robot onto a farm.
Yeah, I guess because I haven't been out on any of these farms myself, and probably a lot of listeners haven't, it's probably hard to actually visualize the size or scale of these kinds of operations. And when you say something like that, like, hey, they just left food out there because they just didn't have the capability or didn't know that it was there. I know you've got your digital layer as well on top of your autonomy. How does that bring value to the farmer?
Yeah, so this is another aspect of farming that I think a lot of folks would find surprising. So we all have some idea of what a factory looks like, especially in today's day and age. We've all seen images of the robots assembling vehicles, and every last thing is being captured on cameras, or the position of the robot is known. And when an assembly line goes down, it's handled within 2 minutes. And we might assume that most industrial operations are tracked with that level of efficiency. But in agriculture, that's not the case. So a farm is essentially a factory, and it's literally growing food. But instead of having data about everything that's happening, at best, you have a farm manager who's heading out to the field maybe once a week and sampling 10, 20 spots in a 1,000-acre field. And he's checking, you know, is this plant getting enough water? Is it getting enough fertilizer? Does it look healthy? And noting that in a logbook. And then he's saying, tomorrow we're going to run this kind of spray, and logs it in a notebook with pen and paper. We've been out to farmers where we ask, hey, what did you run last year? And they pull out a notebook and flip pages back to tell us how they ran a multi-million-dollar farm operation with millions of dollars of inputs and millions of dollars of outputs on paper.
Very old school.
Because it's incredibly difficult. Yeah, it's one of the, I've been in the industrial space for 10, 15 years, and it is probably one of the most back to basics I've seen in all the different verticals that I've touched. Another example is when they see an issue, like a vine that is injured, for example, and either needs treatment or needs to be pulled out of the ground. They'll mark that by putting a red Solo cup on that vine. And the tractor driver, when they come by the next day, is supposed to see that and investigate and address. That's the method of marking an issue in a farm today. So I think without that context, it's very difficult to appreciate how digitizing the farm can really transform their operations. But if you imagine that's how things are being done today, and then you think about unleashing our tractor on the farm, our tractor captures 360-degree 3D point cloud data every time it goes up and down the road, which it does about 10 times a year. It's logging all the information about the operation it's doing. So it's saying, hey, I'm spraying chemical X today at this rate on these vines, or I'm tilling land at this depth, for example. All of that is being logged. And the farmer can now go back and look at a play-by-play of their entire season, and they can pull out the data of the plants and compare the plant health to that play-by-play of their operations. So they have their input, the operations and the things they put into the field, and they have their output, the crop's health over the season. It's side by side, it's geotagged and time-stamped, and they can begin to run analysis on this. They can, just for starters, they can begin to access it.
Yeah.
And they'll never not be able to know what happened. And then layer on top of that, they'll be able to start doing analysis on this to actually see where there's correlation. And, there's different players in the space who are doing this today. Folks, it's a space called farm management systems. But rarely has there been an operation that's been able to connect the user interface or the tool with the actual underlying data that you need to make good decisions. And we believe that our system, because it's running through the field so often, collecting so much data, will be kind of that first chance for farmers to connect the day-to-day data with the results and actually begin to make data-driven decisions on their farm operations in a way that they haven't been able to before.
It's amazing. Yeah, that's pretty great. Crazy to think about, like having all of that at your fingertips. This probably would not make sense because I'm not from the farming world, but could they or would they be able to like A/B test ways of maintaining crops in the same year and then compare them at the end of it? Is that something that people do?
Absolutely. And your
I'm a
point
farmer.
kind of warrants a little bit of, yeah. Look at that. You've essentially graduated into the higher echelon of data driven farmers. But no, it warrants a bit of explaining. We say farmer, and if you actually dig into the farming ecosystem, there's really a couple of different worlds. You've got large crops like wheat, soybeans, and these are mostly in the Midwest, and they're multi-thousand acre operations at a minimum. That world has adopted a lot of what you and I were just talking about because the scale is so immense that the efficiency gains from it made it a no-brainer years ago. And so they've actually done some of these concepts that you're talking about, A/B testing different lots with different fertilizers or input regimens, as they might call them. But the segment that the Mark V Monarch Tractor targets, which is what people call specialty crops, of which vineyards is one class, but then you also have orchards, almonds, berries, citruses, anything that's vertically trellised. That segment of farming, because the properties tend to be smaller, hasn't been able to implement the same technology because they're smaller operations. They need lower cost solutions. The solutions that do this type of stuff today are rather expensive and only make sense in the big scale. So the types of techniques like A/B testing, which those large farms do today, we're going to enable the smaller farmer to do. That's really our value proposition. A lot of times when we're sitting down with a vineyard farmer or a citrus farmer, we're saying, hey, the things the big guys are doing, we've got a tractor that's in a price point that works for you that can enable you to start doing that too.
Love that. That's game changing. So I'd love to, I know I mentioned it on the intro, but Monarch has this unique approach of putting farmers first and partnering with farmers as well. Can you explain how this approach guides how it works, and then how it guides the company's mission and your operations and things like that?
Yeah. So I think nothing's better than kind of showing who you hire first. So when the company was founded, there's 4 founders. One of them was our chief farming officer, Carlo Mondavi, who grows, his family has a long, rich history of growing grapes in the Napa Valley region. And he's essentially made sure from day one that we are never building a science project. Everything we're building is always directly related to customer feedback. And that in autonomy, as you've probably seen in many companies that you've interacted with, in autonomy, being customer first a lot of times means that you recognize what's deployable and what's not. You're designing for deployability. You're designing for ease of use versus having the next whiz-bang feature. You're actually trying to think, how can I make this simpler? And I think that Monarch's did a good job of designing our autonomy system so that it can quickly be transitioned over to a farmer so that they can run it. Many autonomy companies, those that run robot as a service, they run robot as a service because the system's complexity is such that really the creator is the only person who's capable to manage it, which is a perfectly fair place to start. In fact, it's where we started. But we spend a lot of time thinking about how to hand over to the farm. So we run a pretty methodical process where we'll come out to a farm and we'll first map it. And we'll have the farmer with us as we do all the mapping. Then Monarch will run those tractors autonomously with the farmer watching. So that's kind of step 2. So that they essentially get to see the experience of what it looks like to run this on their farm under their setup, which we just integrated. And then we transition it to them running the autonomous tractor, the farmer, and us watching. Because there's going to be hiccups. And we're there to essentially see those hiccups, resolve them quickly, so that there's not this immense amount of frustration that builds up, which is not uncommon in autonomy deployments, where people drop off the vehicle, wave goodbye, and wish the user the best of luck. So we stick around and we essentially we work through the growing pains with them. And then we step back into essentially your traditional tier 2 support structure, where if an issue arises, the farmer handles it first, and then they kick it over to us if it's something that can't be handled on their own. And so I think being thoughtful about that and recognizing what it takes to actually deploy autonomy, which is something you get when you have a team that's seen this play a few times, is really important to ensuring that farmers actually adopt this and don't just sit it in the shed and say,
Yeah.
this thing's too complicated, or, it doesn't run consistently enough for me.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's one of the biggest hurdles and challenges for adoption of new technology in industries that are, to use what I said earlier, old school. If they're still using pad and paper to track things, and they're still, hey, we're going to leave food out there because we can't get the staff to do it. Bringing in an autonomous vehicle can, one, probably be a big hurdle, but two, be so daunting for someone who's used to doing something the same way over years and years and years. So it must be refreshing for them, and also unbelievably helpful to have you basically deploying it and helping run it for them. You get rid of that barrier. That's great. Is it actually down to the farmer themselves to run, say they've purchased 10, are they going to run and all of these tractors themselves, or would they, train someone else? Because some people think, oh, I need a robot operator now. Now that's an extra person I have to have on a hand, or like a autonomous vehicle operator or whatever it is. Do they train one of their other drivers to do that? Do they just do it? Is it easy enough that they can just do it off an app? I'm curious.
Yeah. So this gets back to some of that farmer first design that we were doing in the early days. The way a farm management team will work is you'll really have, a tractor manager for every, say, 5 tractor drivers. So every team of 5 tractor drivers is maybe doing a certain operation in a certain field, and they've got a manager who's, managing their schedules. When are you going to come out? When do you start? When do you stop? What task are you going to do? There's a lot of overhead in doing that. When we think about replacing those tractors with from human-driven tractors to autonomy, that manager and the skill set they have really tightly correlates to what they're being asked to do as an autonomy tractor manager. And so we worked with these folks pretty closely to develop a tool. We call it Wingspan AI. It's essentially your fleet management tool. If you think about generalizing it to the bunch of robotics companies you've interacted with, it's the fleet management tool. And it's where they can log in either through their phone or through a desktop application. And they can really do everything you need to manage a fleet of autonomy tractors. They can log them in as, associated with certain lots. They can log in a whole bunch of different implements that those tractors are allowed to hook up to. They can prepare the tractor for a mission, saying, go to this block and run from this row to this row at this speed, this height on the implement, go. And then they can remote monitor. They can help do teleop functions when the tractor becomes confused or runs into an incident. Like, let's say a person is in the row, the tractor will stop and it'll wait for that manager to say, you're good to go. And then they can even review the data after the fact. So all of that's been encapsulated into this Wingspan AI application for that fleet manager to essentially run the tractors from.
It's cool. Very cool. And I don't know, how much can you share about your business model?
Yeah, because we're in market, most of it's rather exposed. So I can be pretty transparent. We sell our tractors today. Farmers buy them like they would any other tractor. It's list price on the website of around $89,000, which is about 2 times what an equivalent diesel tractor would cost, a non-autonomous diesel tractor. And then the farmer pays a monthly subscription fee to access the autonomy. And if you think about the business model and how we make this a win-win between us and the farmer, we charge significantly less for that monthly fee than the equivalent labor that we displace. And as the farmer utilizes the tractor, we receive the SaaS revenue from that, and then the farmer essentially receives the benefit of not having to pay out the labor, as well as the benefit of being able to run more hours, run when they want, track all the data from the run, etc. And so over time, the value accrues to both parties in a pretty symbiotic way. We're essentially both incentivized to get utilization up on the tractors.
That's great. I'm assuming you could just, because they're autonomous, run them in the evening as well, or at night. Do you have to do it during the day? Is there limitations to usage? Because obviously when you've got employees, it's like, hey, I can't see, or I'm not working in the middle of the night, double pay.
Exactly. So you probably know this from the exposure to autonomy, but many times autonomy will run better in the evening because you get to control your own lighting. So
Yeah.
we have, high visibility lights on the vehicle that shoot out as far as we need for our autonomy system to run. So the system does run rather well at night. And you're right, you pick up that added benefit of now you're running at a time that you'd be very hard pressed to hire a driver for otherwise.
Yeah, that probably speeds up the ROI timeline because now you're
Mhm.
operating 24/7 if you wanted to. What feedback have you got? I'm just curious if there's any like success stories or how adoption of Monarch tractors has like impacted some of these operators or some of these operations.
Yeah, no, we've actually done a handful of case studies that we typically share with new customers, but yeah, we've seen folks who've been able to mow at a rate that they haven't been able to mow previously. So they've where they might have had to let land run longer, they've been able to essentially autonomously mow such that they're able to maintain the property better, which ensures that more nutrients go to the crop that's growing. Um, and we've got other versions of that case study on the electric side as well. But if we think about feedback, as you've probably seen from autonomy deployments, there's just kind of this infinite long tail of small edge cases where the autonomy needs to be brought up uh, to human equivalent performance. And having hundreds of tractors out in the field has allowed us to essentially form a bank of these feedback points. And it's just amazing the little nuances that farmers notice when the tractor's running, like it should be a little further right, or it should pick up the implement a little later in the row, or essentially they're almost critiquing us to get us to being a perfect driver. And we take all that feedback and we essentially burn down that list as our development before our next release. So that's been a rather nice feedback loop that we've been able to stand up between us and the customer. And I'm sure as we deploy to new crops, cover new implements, that'll continue forever, and we'll always be kind of improving the product through their feedback.
That's great. That's great. So your role, chief commercial officer, you shared a bit about more the business plan and everything like that, and how you've been making these projects commercially viable, etc. How do you, in your role, balance the business side with the mission of promoting sustainable and efficient farming practices? Because I can imagine that you obviously shared the price points, double what regular tractors are. There's a lot of R&D that goes into it. These tractors are a lot more technologically advanced than, you know, a regular tractor out there on the market. Increased cost. We talked about the ROI there as well, but it must be hard to try and balance these two things from like a company side and then a mission side, right?
Yeah, so I'll say, credit here goes to the founders and kind of how they structured things. The tractor's electric, and that's where really your incremental cost is incurred. And what that allows you to essentially say when you're talking to a farmer is, yes, you're going to pay a premium to deploy this, but the autonomy is going to cover that premium by way of labor reduction. And there's, a payback period for that 1 year, 2 year, depending on how much you utilize the tractor. And then during that runtime and past it, you're running an electric architecture that's not burning diesel. And so the electric becomes your sustainability proof point. It's very true that if you were automating a diesel tractor, you'd be running up against some sustainability barriers. And then even then I don't think it's necessarily not the best decision, because I think you need to take into consideration the ability to make food cheaper for the world. So even a diesel uh, autonomous tractor, I think, has a lot of sustainability merit around the ability to essentially reduce the cost of food and get healthier food to more people. But I think when you electrify it, you kind of make that a slam dunk case,
Yeah.
and that's kind of how we viewed it when we structured the product in the early days. It incurred a number of additional headaches in the development, but
Mhm.
ultimately allows us to kind of make a strong case to the point that you're making.
Love that. I don't know why I didn't ask that earlier about it being electric. It just makes so much sense, obviously. Sorry, I take some of this stuff for granted because I know the product, right? But for the listeners, yeah. So I've seen your deal with CNHI. Can you explain what you do on the licensing front there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're very practical about how we run the business. We're cognizant of the fact that producing our own tractor as a newer company can only scale so quickly. And with that in mind, and our ultimate goal of getting these technologies into the market, we started up essentially a licensing business. Which, if you break that down and explain it, it's the following: Monarch produces an autonomous system, an electric system, and this digital system. There are many OEMs that have tractors that could benefit greatly from integrating that into their existing tractor and starting to sell that through the large distribution network and manufacturing network that OEM has. And so there's this nice symbiotic relationship that can be created between us and large OEMs. And Case New Holland, which is one of the largest tractor OEMs in the world, saw this vision that we shared early on, about 2-3 years ago, and we essentially partnered with them to do exactly that. We took an existing tractor of theirs. They looked at our electric architecture and they looked at our autonomy architecture, and they said, we want to integrate those onto this tractor. And we worked as two engineering teams to make that integration happen. And then that tractor is now in the process of being deployed and sold, which we did this in roughly 2 years, which is at best half the time, probably a third of the time it would take if a large OEM tried to run this process on its own from beginning to end. And the same is true on the other side. If we wanted to achieve the volume scaling that we're expecting and hoping from this, it would take us that long to do it. So it's one of these nice corners of the business market where there's a really good symbiotic relationship to be had between the two organizations. Yeah. We've done it with CNH, and now we're looking to replicate it with other OEMs that can benefit from it.
Love that. So the partnerships, they're going to play a big part into like your commercial vision.
Yes, that's our theory, and there's millions of tractors sold annually. And so you can just do the math on how quick any one company can ramp. And so we really see this vector of business growth as the one that creates the 10x volume growth. Will always be a company that makes tractors and makes a good volume of tractors, but we hope to essentially license to as many, if not more, tractor units over time, because that's how you get the true industry tipping point to be hit.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think it's very forward thinking as well. I don't know how many people or how many companies are actually doing something like that. It's more they position themselves to a point of being a competitor, and then their exit strategy is an acquisition, being acquired by the bigger player, and then they just roll everyone in there instead of, we're going to stay independent and we're going to stay with our mission and focus, but this technology is impactful for the whole industry and we can license it and reap the greater good of what we're trying to do here at scale. That's refreshing.
Yeah, no, you let one OEM acquire you, and that you bestow the capability onto them and the size of their manufacturing. You license to 3 or 4, you see 3 or 4 times the impact is the thought. It's a long game, but that's the thought.
That's great. So usually with our guests, I like to get an idea about your perspective on the future state of the industry. So and also the current state, and we'll keep it specific to ag tech, and you can go into robotics if you like, or stay on the autonomous side of things, etc. But just technology in the space, and what trends do you see right now, and what do you think is going to be coming in the future?
I think probably one of the biggest trends that I'm bought in on is the following. The last 10 years we poured tens of billions of dollars into on-road autonomy, and we moved the ball forward in just a Herculean societal shifting way with how neural networks run, how sensors are able to perform, how compute is able to work. And I think that we're at a moment where a lot of that technology is starting to trickle to the off-road world and actually get implemented because of how much easier the ODD is.
Yeah.
And the talent, some of the talent is coming that way as well. You're watching some of these off-road autonomy plays, the agriculture plays specifically, start to be populated by some of the great engineers that built the foundation in the on-road world. And I think that that's going to create this incredible kind of renaissance in off-road autonomy over the next, literally this year, next year, and the year after that, where these folks are going to get commercial deployments out and running, and they're standing on the shoulders of the last decade of R&D that happened in the on-road world.
Yeah.
I think the on-road world's going to follow right behind it, but I'm super excited about what opportunities lie ahead in off-road. And I think agriculture is one of the tightest value proposition to level of engineering effort. It's one of the highest ROI autonomy applications, in my opinion. So I'm especially excited about what happens there.
That is, I mean, it is very exciting. And I'm glad that you mentioned that about the talent as well. I was having this conversation recently, and it's true. The engineers, the founders, the scientists, people that have been doing so much research into that space, some of them just got frustrated at one point, and they're like, no matter how good our tech is, no matter how much work we put in place here, it's still not up to us, or we don't have the influence to get this to be commercial. In some of them in their lifetime, they thought, some of them in the next 10 years. And at this point in my career, I just want to see my product being used. I want to see something that I've worked on, you know, having an impact, and people, getting the good from it. And, there's still a lot going on with commercial or widespread autonomous vehicles, like you say, on road, but it's still a struggle. It's still tough. There's still like little pockets of it. It takes one bad article to set us back a year or two. So yeah, it's great. And I definitely agree with you. A lot of that is going to be happening talent wise, focus wise, probably startup wise.
An interesting thought on your point. Funny enough, I think some of the off-road applications will get deployed, and they'll optimize how operations actually work. And some of those learnings will get sent back to the on-road world as it starts to deploy right behind it. So hopefully the off-road environment will pay back to the on-road for everything that it gave us, and it'll be nice and symbiotic.
Let's hope. You can only hope, I guess. Are there any challenges that you think that the agriculture industry needs to address to embrace autonomous technology fully? Is there much pushback that you see?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as I said earlier, this is an industry that largely uses pen and paper today to get things done. And so I think the education effort that needs to be put in with farmers is immense. And it's fair. I mean, farmers will say to us, I pretty much make 40 bets in my lifetime, because they have 40 seasons. They're working careers 40 years. Every year they're making calls on how they're going to run that season. And they're essentially saying, hey, is this the year I'm going to bet on you, new company? To get someone to make that kind of bet requires an immense amount of education, proving out the numbers, proving out that the operations will be there, standing by their side and making them feel comfortable that it's not going to tank their crop season. So I think that's probably the biggest barrier. Is companies like us and others in the industry need to put an immense amount of effort into helping bring farmers along for the journey.
Yeah.
I think it's totally doable, but we need to keep our eye on that ball. That's half the equation alongside the tech development.
So true. So true. Okay, I know we're at time or a little bit over, but before we go, are there any upcoming developments, innovations, projects, partnerships, anything that the listeners should be excited about?
Yeah, no, with us, I think we're in the early throes of commercializing, and so I would really just watch our LinkedIn page as we get deployed on this and that farm and get them up and running autonomously. It's a little bit more of a steady slope that we're trying to climb now versus these big binary actions. So I would just watch our progress, on LinkedIn and in the news.
Perfect, thank you. And so LinkedIn, what's the website as well? Where can people follow that?
Yeah, monarchtractor.com.
Okay, and yourself, LinkedIn as well. Is that probably the best place?
Yeah, Sam Abidi, LinkedIn.
Perfect. All right,
Yeah,
great.
absolutely.
This was awesome. Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate you joining us. I know that we've been talking about this for a while, so I'm glad that we could get it on the calendar. And this has been really insightful. I'm happy we can share it with everyone and just open other people's, general public's eyes to the world of agriculture tech and how autonomous vehicles can really move the needle there and help us all, really, at the end of the day.
No, thank you so much for helping me tell the story, and I really look forward to hearing people's feedback.
Thanks, Sam. Take care.